Welcome on this roundtable regarding the social impact of arts. And this is my pleasure to receive Dr. Nisha Sajnani together with Julian Boal to discuss about the Theater of the Oppressed and the Theater Forum that Augusto Boal developed. So thank you very much to both of you for taking the time to join. The first question would be simply explanations. What is Theater of the Oppressed? How it is used today to support social inclusion?
It's a simple question, but it takes a long answer. I will try to be as brief as possible. No, so Theater of the Oppressed is a technique, is a set of techniques, theatrical techniques that were invented by my father at the time of the dictatorship here in Brazil, in a way to fight against the dictatorship. And in this struggle against the dictatorship, my father found out that it was not enough to do theater as he used to. But he found out that theater could be also a place that not only fought oppression, but that somehow reproduces oppression by making a division between the people that are allowed to talk and those that are not, the people that are allowed to act and those that are not, the people that are allowed to be under the limelight and the ones that are confined in the darkness, only allowed to applaud at the end. And this division of the world was a division that existed in theater, but not only in theater, and mainly this division exists in our society in politics, where there is those that are allowed to act, to do things, to speak, to be under the limelight, and those that are just allowed to, and not from time to time, not even, but those that are allowed to vote, which my father called the strange power of voting. Strange because it's a power that disappears as soon as it is exerted. So therefore, my father tried to invent new sets of techniques, theatrical techniques, in order to not reproduce this division of the world. So Theater of the Oppressed is a kind of theater where the people are allowed to go on stage, not because they are specialists, but because they have a certain experience of oppression. And not only they have this experience of oppression, but they will represented in such a manner that the audience, after the representation, will be allowed to replace the protagonist and will try to invent other ways of facing such oppressions. That's what I describe is just one technique, is the forum theater technique, which is the most known technique of Theater of the Oppressed. It's used worldwide. Peasants in India use it. Also, prisoners in France, as well as people with HIV in Mozambique. Here in Brazil, there will be many different kind of communities, many kind of struggles that will be represented by Theater of the Oppressed. There was a yellow pages of Theater of the Oppressed with more than 130 groups existing worldwide, and we know that many groups were not included on it. So there is virtually maybe 200, 300, 400. I cannot even know actually for sure how many groups exist over there, speaking virtually of any subject, I guess.
So we talk a lot about Theater of the Oppressed or Theater Forum, and you confirm that this Theater Forum is linked to Theater of the Oppressed, oppressed being this audience which is not allowed to participate, and the forum is really letting go the talk from any part of people, saying that the audience is allowed to come on stage. Is that correct?
It's correct that the forum theater is one of the techniques of Theater of the Oppressed, but there is, many others. Newspaper theater, invisible theater, rainbow of desire, and legislative theater, and so on and so on. My father was a very prolific technique inventor.
Creative, it was a genius. Nisha, so we saw already, all you're doing in education in your lab. Could you tell us a little bit the project you developed with Julian regarding this Theater of the Oppressed lately?
Well, just 2 weeks ago, we had the pleasure of bringing a group of students from NYU, from New York University, across educational theater, drama therapy, as well as students from art education and other related fields to Rio to be able to study with Julian and Gio Brito in the School of Poplar Theater, which both of them co-founded and now co-lead with other members of the ETP team. And I think what was particularly unique about that experience is that students are learning techniques of the theater of the oppressed, which Julian just spoke about, but then looking at how these techniques might inform the different social movements in which members of the school are deeply engaged. And so over the course of the week, we were able to visit different community organizations that are focused on land rights, on housing security, on food security, on cultural activism. So right across the board, there was an attention to intersections of racial, gender bias, and other kinds of social injustices, and an understanding that the theater is but one technique, one set of tools that might be used to help a community clarify their concerns and crystallize different options for action, or at least explore those possibilities. So, often when we learn these kinds of approaches, we're learning them inside the four walls of a classroom. And so I was deeply appreciative to Julian and the ETP team for helping us break out of that typical mold of learning into something that has changed the lives. I can say that really quite definitely changed the lives of the entire group.
So we understand that there is a high level of participation. You described forum theater. So let's say among the multiple techniques that Augusto Boal discovered, which one would fit better for which audience? If, let's say, we don't know what to begin with when you're talking about theater of the oppressed, what would be more efficient in terms of artistic purposes to discover, and for which population? You said, prisoners in France. You said, people in India would be farmers. So how can we try to classify things?
Look, it's difficult to answer like this because it's really based on the situation itself. For instance, invisible theater. Invisible theater is a kind of theater that my father invented at a certain moment in Argentina, when it was not yet the dictatorship, but there was already people on the street being killed, shot. So there was a lot of repression already in the street. So my father said that if it was no longer possible to do visible theater, then people should do invisible theater. And by that he meant, to go to the streets and to perform an act without nobody knowing that it was an act. And it was a way to have debates about democracy, about safety, about political rights, and things like this, in a manner that the actors, the actress, wouldn't be exposed and therefore wouldn't be targets of the repression. It could be about anything. It could be about hunger, right to eat, and stuff like this. And it was linked with the fear of political repression. Somehow it was the same thing that happened when we did it here in Brazil last year. We did it a little bit because people were really afraid of the extreme right violence, of the people that voted for Bolsonaro. We are used to be scared of people with uniforms, but the fact now in Brazil is that we don't know who voted for Bolsonaro. We don't know to which extent they are willing to do violent acts against people that don't think alike. So we use the invisible theater in that manner. But I remember using invisible theater years ago, like something like 15 years ago, in the city of Marseille, in the south of France, with an organization called AIDS that do talk about HIV, about the struggle against HIV and the struggle against the prejudice against people that have HIV. And they used the invisible theater in order to understand better what people were thinking about people with HIV. So where they were doing little scenes, going to the street, and as a research method to see if people knew, for instance, that it's possible to have HIV and to have a kid that will not be HIV positive. For instance, that was one of the questions. Or how much people will consider that someone that had HIV and that passes to someone else is guilty, because at that time there was a law proposition in France that wanted to criminalize the passing HIV to someone else. So they wanted to research that, and invisible theater was a way of researching it. So it's really difficult to answer to your question, because it's again, it's really situational. It's really related to a situation, a specific situation, and there is not stiff categories saying like this kind of technique should fit more for that kind of person or that kind of situation. It's really, and that's the best thing actually, to have it not as a, how to say that, as dogmas, but to have it as ideas, for a proposition of ideas that can always be moving.
Yes, so Nisha, you were saying that it's life-changing for the students. You have been traveling with Augusto Boal's technique everywhere. Did you see each time a real change with the people participating, a better willingness to make a change in the society? And is it as difficult as when Augusto Boal was trying to fight, the regime? Do you see, in the country that there are some more or less darkness to fight?
I can't say whether it's more or less difficult. I mean, I would wager a guess that perhaps it's less, but everybody's struggle feels like a struggle to them. So, in working with a group of women in Montreal who were experiencing domestic violence, intimate partner violence at home, and then dealing with racism on the street as they tried to get their credentials recognized in order to work, I had been working with a group of recent immigrants for many years at the South Asian Women's Community Center. And we would use forum theater as a means of exploring some of the challenges that they were up against. And it would open up meaningful conversations in the group. They would help to strategize with each other. They often would depart, picking up on what Julian was just saying, they wouldn't work in a very rigid frame. They would replace who they wanted to replace in the scene in order to give the group a better sense of what the realities were. They would explore opportunities for allyship within the scene, which is, I know, a direction that you've taken the work significantly, Julian. I would see these women do that, explore, maybe I can't deal with the primary oppressor in this scene, but maybe I can convince my neighbor to help me out. Maybe I can convince the other people who are, attempting to compete for the same job to collaborate a bit more. I mean, I'm sort of pulling at a few different examples there, but I would say that if anything, we're working in a realm of imagination and play. And representation, and in that realm of dramatic reality, there is so much more possible than what they often experience in real life, and that does confer a certain sense of courage and possibility, whereas somebody might have felt more foreclosed before.
So that's the possibilism of the art of theater that is allowing us to really get into this virtual world where everything is possible and everything can be improved and falling all together if we're changing a word, if we are changing a posture. That's the magic of theater. Anything that you want to tell us regarding a very transformational project that you lived? You mentioned what you had to go through 2 weeks ago. Julian, what would be the most, I would say, amazing experience you had with which group of people that you really saw being transformed?
No, so it's been now, I don't know how many years that I work with Theatre of the Press, so there is more than one. Obviously, it comes to my mind a group that is also a movement that's called Jana Sanskriti. Jana Sanskriti meaning people culture in Sanskrit. It's a group from India, a group from West Bengal. And there is, I believe, something like 200,000 peasants inside this movement that use as a main tool Theatre of the Press in order to organize itself, in order to create campaigns, in order to foster awareness about certain issues, about as a way to organize struggles, to organize internal democracy. Theatre of the Press will be the main tool. So this is a very interesting movement, and when I saw it 20 years ago, it's actually the moment in which I really decided I wanted to do that with my life. Then I don't want to give awards of the people that I saw having most transformation, but this current project that I'm involved in, current group that I'm involved with, that Nisha mentioned now, the Poplar Theater School, I'm going to say that the person that most changed on it, I cannot be sure of that, but one of them, it's me actually, because being inside such a movement, such an organization, oblige you to think through the heads of many people. So inside the group, there is people that lives inside the occupied houses, occupied buildings. There is people that lives in slums, in very violent slums. There is people that side by side with other kind of people that never had an empty fridge in their house, and having to figure out how each one of them think, of each one of them perceive reality, is an exercise that exactly as I said before, made me have to think through the heads of many people, and it's something that I would have never experienced before. It's also something that makes me experiment Rio, the very city in which I live, in a completely different manner than if I was just a middle class, petit bourgeois artist and so on. I know better Rio, I understand better Rio, understand better the reality in which I am, because I was forced to learn through the heads of so many people. So I don't know if I'm the one that was transformed the most, but I'm definitely one of those people that were transformed. Having to understand discipline, having to understand a lot of things that maybe people that don't work inside collectives have not the experience of having.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, to finish, what do you think could be the message, of the Theatre of the Oppressed today regarding this International World Art Day 2023? What is your message, both?
Nisha, you start.
The métier of the artist is imagination. That's the palette with which they're coloring. And there are many social concerns that we're up against today, climate change being a significant one that poses a threat to all of us, but many that follow suit from that in terms of racial and gender justice and interconnected oppressions that we need imagination for in order to find new possibilities and new options for action around. So I would say to the artists and arts practitioners around us, to be bold in their work, because we need it now more than ever.
Thank you.
I completely agree with the sense of urgency that Nisha pointed out regarding the climate crisis and so many other crises that compile each other, that seems to be multiplying each other. Regarding what Theatre of the Press would have to say to nowadays, I believe is the following: is that we cannot produce as before if we don't want to produce the same thing as before. So it's not good enough to have good intentions, but we need also to produce in a different manner. And the same way that, for instance, the landless movement that Nisha was able to visit, they don't just claim the land to produce as before with agro-industry, kind of culture that destroys the very land, but they claim the land in order to produce in a different manner, to produce with agroecological concerns. The same way we artists cannot claim the stage to produce as before. We need to claim the stage to produce in a different manner, in different relationship with our audience. Otherwise, we will keep on producing what was produced before. And in order to avoid the catastrophes yet to come, we need to completely change our ways of producing theater, aliments, food, or everything, life itself.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this beautiful food for thoughts. Thank you for your engagement, and wishing you all the best with the Theatre of the Oppressed.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.